98%. That is the number they want you to believe. 98% of Tanzania voted for one woman, one vision, one future already written before the ballot boxes even opened. On the 29th of October 2025, the calm heart of East Africa stopped beating in rhythm with democracy and started pounding with something else entirely. Fear dressed as victory, repression wrapped in the language of order. Dar es Salaam, a city that once smelled of salt and ambition, now reeks of tear gas and smoke. The streets that carried the songs of fishermen and the laughter of schoolchildren now echo with sirens, with boots on pavement, with voices screaming words too long swallowed in silence. Freedom, justice, truth. More than 1,000 voices silenced, not by foreign invaders, not by natural disaster, by their own government. President Samia Suluhu Hassan, the woman once praised as East Africa's reformer, the gentle hand after the iron fist of John Magufuli, now presides over a nation bleeding from wounds she promised to heal. The African Union condemned the election. The United Nations called for investigations. Human rights organizations documented bodies hidden, evidence concealed, families shattered. And still, the official narrative remains. Peace has been restored. But peace is not the absence of noise. Peace is the presence of justice. And in Tanzania today, there is only quiet suffering. Do not look away. What comes next may change how we read the map. If you believe in these stories, give us your like, leave your thoughts, and subscribe to continue this journey together. Because this is not just Tanzania's story. It is a warning, a mirror, and perhaps, if we listen closely enough, a seed of hope waiting to grow. She arrived as a promise. When Samia Suluhu Hassan stepped into the presidency in March 2021, she carried the weight of a nation exhausted by authoritarianism. John Magufuli, her predecessor, had died suddenly, leaving behind a legacy of bulldozers and censorship, of infrastructure projects built on the backs of silenced critics. The country grieved, but it also hoped. Samia was different, they said. A woman in a region dominated by men. A diplomat in a time hungry for dialogue. A voice that spoke softly when the previous one had only shouted. She reopened media houses that Magufuli had shuttered. She released political prisoners whose names had been whispered only in fear. She spoke of reconciliation, of unity, of a new chapter for Tanzania. For a brief moment, it felt like dawn. The West celebrated her. Headlines called her East Africa's beacon of reform. Diplomats flew to Dar es Salaam with smiles and handshakes, praising her pragmatism, her composure, her courage. She was featured in magazines, lauded at conferences, held up as proof that African democracy could heal itself from within. But power is a patient teacher, and over 4 years, the lessons grew darker. By 2023, critical journalists were losing their credentials. By 2024, opposition rallies were being canceled under the guise of security concerns. The Electoral Commission, still under party control, began disqualifying candidates before the race even started. Among them was Tundu Lissu, the lawyer who had once survived 16 bullets for daring to challenge the state. A man whose name had become synonymous with resilience and defiance. When Lissu was barred from the October 2025 election, something cracked in the national consciousness. This was not reform. This was choreography, a coronation disguised as democracy. On the 29th of October, the results came swiftly, almost mockingly. 98% for Samia Suluhu Hassan. 98%. A number so absurd it insulted the intelligence of every citizen who knew how to count, how to think, how to remember what real elections looked like. The African Union Observer Mission released a statement the world tried to ignore.
The electoral process was not conducted in a manner consistent with the principles of a credible, transparent, and inclusive election. The Southern African Development Community echoed the sentiment. The United Nations Human Rights Council called for independent investigations. Even Archbishop Gervas Nyasanga of the Tanzania Episcopal Conference, a man of measured words and careful diplomacy, could not stay silent. "This is a disgrace before God," he said, his voice trembling not with rage, but with sorrow. But condemnation from abroad means little when the police are already moving. Within hours of the results, state media began its script: foreign interference, youth confusion, enemies of progress. The same tired words authoritarian governments have used for decades when their people dare to ask for dignity. Samia appeared on television, composed as always, her tone measured, her message clear. Stability must be protected.
Yet beneath that calm surface, the machinery of repression was already grinding into motion. Internet speed slowed to a crawl. Social media platforms flickered in and out of accessibility. Text messages containing words like protest or election fraud failed to send. By the 30th of October, a full blackout descended over the nation, cutting Tanzania off from the world just as its people needed to be heard the most. In the capital, soldiers moved into position outside government buildings, universities, and media houses. Curfews were announced, movement was restricted. And in the quiet of enforced order, fear began to spread like wildfire through dry grass. Analysts watching from Nairobi, from Johannesburg, from London and Washington all asked the same question: how did the woman who promised light become the architect of darkness? Perhaps the answer is simpler than we want to admit. Perhaps power does not corrupt slowly. Perhaps it reveals. Perhaps the promises were always paper thin, designed to buy time, to buy trust, to buy silence. And when the people finally refused to stay bought, the masks simply fell away. Because numbers on paper mean nothing when the people refuse to stay silent. Let us take a moment here, not to rush forward, but to give thanks. Write a comment with a simple thank you to Tanzania's youth, to those who dared to speak when silence was safer, or to the spirit of sovereignty itself. Gratitude is not a formality. It is recognition. It is dignity expressed in words. When you add your voice of thanks, you are not just engaging with a video. You are standing in solidarity with a story of freedom and pride. So, before we continue, take this pause to comment your thank you. Together, those words become a beacon that shines far beyond the screen. Dawn on the 30th of October did not bring calm. It brought defiance. Students from the University of Dar es Salaam were the first to move. They did not wait for permission. They did not ask for approval from deans or ministers or soldiers. They simply walked. At first, dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Their banners were stitched from old bedsheets and plastic tarps, their words painted in red as if written with warning. Freedom is not a crime. Let Lissu go. 98% is a lie. Their steps were uneven, but their rhythm was steady. The rhythm of a generation that had finally found its voice. Among them was Aisha, a 22-year-old economics student whose hands trembled as she gripped a borrowed megaphone. She had never spoken in public before, never shouted, never led. But that morning, standing on the university lawn with the sun burning her shoulders and fear knotting her stomach, she opened her mouth and let the truth pour out. If they can rig an election with 98%, she shouted, her voice cracking but carrying, what will they take from us tomorrow? Our degrees, our jobs, our names? The crowd roared in answer, not with violence, not with chaos, with recognition. Because every young person standing there had lived beneath the same quiet oppression for years. Jobless, restless, unheard. Watching their dreams dissolve in the acid of a system that promised progress but delivered only patronage.
By noon, the protests had spread to Arusha, to Dodoma, to Mwanza. Taxi drivers honked their horns in solidarity. Factory workers walked out mid-shift chanting Uhuru kwa wote, freedom for all. Teachers, mothers, shopkeepers, the invisible backbone of the nation, stepped into the streets for the first time in their lives, carrying nothing but courage borrowed from their children. In one viral video, a gray-haired teacher stood before a government office and tore his official identification card in half. "They told us to love peace," he said, his voice shaking with decades of suppressed rage. But peace without justice is just quiet suffering. The clip spread like wildfire before the authorities could block it. Screenshots flooded WhatsApp groups, voice notes circulated on Telegram, encrypted networks hummed with activity. Truth, it seemed, had learned to travel faster than censorship. The government responded the only way it knew how, with force. Tear gas curled through the humid air, mixing with the smell of rain and sweat. Rubber bullets cracked against pavement, against flesh, against hope. Police trucks rolled through neighborhoods, loudspeakers blaring warnings, "Return to your homes, disperse immediately. This is illegal assembly." But for every baton raised, 10 more voices answered. For every arrest, 20 more people joined the march. By nightfall, Dar es Salaam had become a city at war with itself. Not the war of guns and bombs, but the war of will against power, of memory against erasure, of people against the machinery designed to keep them silent. Inside State House, advisors argued. Some pleaded for restraint, warning that violence would only fuel the fire. Others demanded a harder crackdown, insisting that order must be restored at any cost. President Samia Suluhu Hassan sat behind thick curtains, watching the city burn on television screens, her reflection flickering on the glass like a ghost, uncertain of its own existence. She chose silence, and silence spoke louder than any decree. The next morning, November the 1st, the death toll began to surface in whispers. CHADEMA, the main opposition party, reported more than 1,000 dead. The government called it gross exaggeration. Human Rights Watch documented widespread use of lethal force, including live ammunition. The United Nations confirmed hundreds killed, with credible reports of bodies being concealed by security forces. Volker Turk, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, issued a statement that cut through the diplomatic fog. There appears to be an attempt to conceal evidence of the scale of casualties. But numbers, no matter how horrifying, can feel abstract. It is the faces that haunt. The mothers taping faded photographs of their sons to rusted poles in the backstreets of Kariako, hoping someone, anyone, has seen them. The young woman live streaming from a hidden room, her voice steady until the moment the door breaks open and the feed goes black. The boy, no older than 16, lifting a torn flag above his head as police charge, yelling with a voice that cracks but does not break. Freedom is not a crime. His face, bruised but unbroken, became the image of a generation refusing to bow. By the 3rd of November, the streets were empty again, not because the people had given up, because the curfew extended into weeks, because the internet remained throttled, because 145 people had been charged with treason, a word designed to terrify, to isolate, to break solidarity before it could harden into revolution. 4 opposition leaders, John Hetch, Amani Golagwa, God Bless Lema, and Boniface Jacob, were granted bail after intense international pressure. But Tundu Lissu, the man whose name had started it all, remained behind bars, charged with crimes against the state, his fate a message to anyone who dared dream of challenge. Yet even in that suffocating quiet, something persisted. In garages and bedrooms, musicians recorded songs on cracked phones, melodies hummed low but infectious. One track, Sauti ya Uhuru, Voice of Freedom, spread through the underground like water finding cracks in stone. Its chorus, soft but unshakable. You can chain the body, not the truth.
On rooftops and in alleys, people banged pots and flashed phone lights into the sky. The message was simple, ancient, unstoppable. We are still here. But the world was watching, and one voice from across the continent would soon echo louder than any government decree. 1,500 miles west of Dar es Salaam, in the red dust heart of Burkina Faso, another story was unfolding. Not of elections rigged, but of sovereignty reclaimed. Not of silence enforced, but of dignity spoken aloud. In Ouagadougou, the capital, a youth conference gathered young Africans from across the continent. They came from Lagos and Lusaka, from Accra and Addis Ababa, from places where hope had been buried and places where it still burned bright. The air was thick with heat and expectation. On the stage, beneath the flag of Burkina Faso, stood Ibrahim Traoré. He was young, younger than most leaders dare to be. A soldier turned president, a man whose rise to power had been anything but conventional. Some called him a revolutionary. Others called him a risk. But to the youth packed into that hall, sweating beneath tin roofs and hanging on every word, he was something simpler and more dangerous, a voice that refused to apologize for African pride. Traoré did not mention Tanzania directly. He did not need to. When he spoke, his words carried a weight that crossed borders, that found their way into hearts hungry for language they had been denied. A democracy that silences its people, he said, his voice steady, his gaze unflinching, is no democracy at all. The hall erupted, not in violence, in recognition. Within hours, the clip was everywhere, shared in internet cafes in Dar es Salaam where students huddled over slow connections, whispered in classrooms in Arusha where teachers risked their jobs to show it on smuggled phones, played on loop in Dodoma where factory workers gathered in secret, finding in Traoré's words an echo of their own unspoken rage. The parallel was impossible to ignore. Here was a leader in West Africa who had defied foreign control, who had challenged the structures that kept his people dependent, who had spoken of sovereignty not as a slogan but as a birthright. And there, in East Africa, was a leader accused of silencing her own people, of rigging elections, of choosing control over courage. Two fires, one on the Sahel's red earth, one on the Indian Ocean shore, both burning for dignity.
But the comparison was not simple. Ibrahim Traoré's path was steeped in controversy. His rise had come through military action, not ballots. His rhetoric against foreign influence was sharp, but his governance remained fragile, untested by the long grind of democracy. He was not a hero without flaws, not a savior without contradictions. Yet to Tanzania's youth, drowning in the silence of their own suppression, those contradictions mattered less than the core truth he voiced: that African people deserve to be heard, that sovereignty begins at home, that dignity is not a gift granted by power, but a right demanded by the powerless. In Burkina Faso, Traoré spoke of breaking free from external chains. In Tanzania, the youth were fighting to break free from internal ones. Two struggles, one wound. The contrast became a rallying cry. On social media, before the platforms were blocked entirely, hashtags merged. Hashtag Tanzania protest met hashtag Burkina Faso sovereignty. Young Africans in Nairobi lit candles for their Tanzanian peers. In Kigali, human rights lawyers signed open letters. In Johannesburg, Parliament debated whether the African Union should intervene before Tanzania's unrest spread like fire across the continent's fragile democracies. And in the encrypted networks where Generation Awazi, the transparency movement, was quietly building its strength, Traoré's words became a mantra. Not because he was perfect, but because he was unafraid. Dignity, one Tanzanian student posted from exile, is the seed of freedom. It can be buried, but it will grow again when watered by courage. The quote was not originally Traoré's, but it became associated with him, repeated in his speeches, echoed in his message. And now it traveled east, carried on the winds of solidarity, finding soil in the hearts of young people who had learned that silence is not safety. It is only the sound before truth returns. Back in Dar es Salaam, Aisha, the student who had shouted through the megaphone, was hiding at her aunt's house. The police had come to her dorm room. They had taken her laptop, her notes, her phone. But they had not taken her voice, not yet. One night, while her aunt slept, Aisha sat by candlelight and wrote a message on a scrap of paper. She folded it carefully, tucked it into her pocket, and the next morning she left it taped to a lamppost near the university gates. It read, "They can take the streets, but not what we've learned. Silence is not safety." By afternoon, the note was gone, but someone had photographed it, and by evening it was circulating again, across borders, across platforms. Proof that even when power tries to erase, memory finds a way to endure. And as his words crossed borders, Tanzania's youth found something more dangerous than anger: hope. Take a second right here to tell us where you are watching from. Type the name of your city, your land, the soil beneath your feet. And as you do, know this: Rise of Africa sends you not just thanks, but a blessing. For strength in your hands, for pride in your heart, for light on the road ahead. The comments below become a map of connection, showing that this message reaches far beyond borders. When the smoke finally lifted from the streets of Dar es Salaam, a heavy silence settled across the city. The kind that does not signal peace, but exhaustion. The kind that smells of fear and wet concrete and memory too painful to speak aloud. The protests were over, the crowds had scattered, but the cost remained, written in empty chairs at dinner tables, in unanswered phone calls, in the faces of mothers who walked the back streets of Kariako, taping photographs to rusted poles. Mariam was one of them, a school teacher from Arusha, 53 years old, hands calloused from decades of gripping chalk and hope in equal measure. Her son, Emmanuel, had been 24, a student, a dreamer, the kind of young man who believed that his degree would matter, that his voice would count, that his country still belonged to its people. On the 2nd of November, he left for a protest carrying nothing but a handwritten sign: "Justice is not a crime." He never came home. When Mariam went to the police station, they told her he was not in their records. When she went to the hospital, they told her to check the morgue. When she went to the morgue, they told her she needed official permission. Permission from the same government that had taken her son. She stands now on a quiet corner, her voice trembling as a local journalist films on a hidden phone. They said my son was a threat. He was a student. He just carried a sign. Her words crack, but she does not cry. There are no tears left to give. She is not alone. In Dodoma, in Mwanza, in every city where the youth dare to speak, mothers wait, fathers search, siblings scroll through social media feeds, hoping for a face, a name, a sign that their loved ones are still breathing somewhere beyond the reach of state silence.
145 people were charged with treason. 4 opposition leaders, John Heche, Amani Golugwa, God Bless Lema, and Boniface Jacob, were granted bail after international pressure mounted. But Tundu Lissu, the man whose disqualification had sparked the fire, remained in custody, his charges heavy with the language of betrayal and sedition. Independent newspapers went dark, editors were summoned, questioned, and then disappeared from public view. Social media platforms flickered in and out of existence, throttled by a government determined to control not just the streets, but the story itself. President Samia Suluhu Hassan appeared only through scripted broadcasts, her face calm, her tone measured. Stability must be protected, she said, as if stability and suffering were not two sides of the same coin. Her silence between sentences felt louder than her words. Yet, amid the despair, something unexpected began to grow. Not in the open, where cameras could capture it and police could crush it, but underground, in the cracks, in the quiet spaces where power cannot always reach. In a law office in Arusha, 3 young attorneys filed a petition demanding Tundu Lissu's release, fully aware they might lose their licenses or worse. In Dodoma, a group of retired army officers issued a rare statement urging restraint, warning that force cannot hold a nation together forever. Churches opened their doors at night to shelter protesters. Imams preached patience, but their eyes betrayed quiet worry. And on the internet, in the places where VPNs still functioned and courage still flickered, a new movement emerged, Generation Uwazi. Uwazi meaning transparency. What began as a hashtag became a network of students, lawyers, and exiled journalists documenting the crackdown. They posted stories, faces, numbers, not anger, evidence. The government tried to shut it down, blocking accounts, tracing IP addresses, threatening families. But every account deleted birthed 3 more. Every story erased was copied, saved, and shared again. Because in the age of silence, memory becomes the loudest weapon. One blogger, writing from exile in Nairobi, posted a line that went viral. They can erase headlines, not memories. Artists painted murals in the dead of night, birds with broken wings, eyes with sewn mouths, flags stitched from barbed wire. By morning, the walls would be painted over, but photographs lived on, circulating through encrypted channels, proof that even when power tries to erase, resistance finds new forms. Musicians uploaded anonymous tracks, whispered anthems recorded in bedrooms and garages. One song, soft but unshakable, became an underground hymn. Sauti ya Uhuru, voice of freedom. Its chorus, simple, defiant, impossible to forget. You can chain the body, not the truth. Aisha, the student who had once shouted through a megaphone, now lived in hiding. Her voice was gone from the streets, but her resolve remained intact. Sitting in her aunt's darkened kitchen, she whispered to a friend over an encrypted call. They can take the streets, but not what we've learned. That silence is not safety. Across the city, in corners unseen by power, that lesson was being learned by thousands. Priests prayed, mothers waited, lawyers signed petitions. Truth adapted, hid, endured. Because in Tanzania, as in every land it learns too late, repression buys obedience, but never belief. And as one old journalist, now banned from broadcasting, wrote in a final letter smuggled online, our rulers think silence is safety, but silence is only the sound before truth returns. Because in the age of silence, memory becomes the loudest weapon. Across the ocean, the story of Tanzania landed softly on polished desks and diplomatic briefings. In Washington, words were chosen with surgical care. A State Department spokesperson stood before the press and said, "The United States urges restraints on all sides and reaffirms its commitment to democratic values." It was the kind of sentence built to mean everything and nothing at once. Behind closed doors, analysts debated in the think tanks of Brookings and the Council on Foreign Relations. Some called President Samia's actions authoritarian pragmatism. Others said she was merely following the pattern of post-liberal democracies worldwide, control wrapped in the language of reform. A veteran diplomat sighed into his coffee. She was supposed to be the success story, a woman of stability in a volatile region. But stability, it seemed, was just another word for silence. In Brussels, the European Union echoed the American statement,
Dialogue, de-escalation, respect for freedoms, but no sanctions followed, no trade embargoes, no visa restrictions. Just words, floating like smoke, dissipating before they could ignite real pressure. In Geneva, the United Nations Human Rights Council called for an independent investigation into the excessive use of force.
Dar es Salaam refused, citing national sovereignty. Volker Turk's statement, "There appears to be an attempt to conceal evidence," was noted, filed, and largely forgotten by the international community within a week. The West, it seemed, had already moved on to the next crisis, but Africa had not. In Nairobi, students marched with candles, their flames flickering in the night like stars refusing to be swallowed by darkness. In Kigali, human rights lawyers signed an open letter condemning the violence, calling it a betrayal of East Africa's democratic promise. In Johannesburg, South Africa's parliament debated whether the African Union should intervene, warning that Tanzania's unrest could ripple across the continent's fragile democracies. In Ouagadougou, where Ibrahim Traore had spoken words that traveled further than any government decree, African youth drew parallels that Western analysts could not see. In the West, they fight to reclaim sovereignty from foreign influence. In the East, they fight to reclaim their right to speak. Two struggles, one wound. To the young people watching from Lagos, from Accra, from Kampala and Kinshasa, the message was clear. The fight was no longer about one leader or one country. It was about who gets to speak for Africa's future, and whether that future would be written by those in power or by those who refuse to stay powerless. Western news outlets framed it as irony. The woman once hailed as a symbol of progress, now accused of repression, wrote The Guardian. Le Monde called out the West's selective morality, willing to condemn coups in one region while applauding stability in another, no matter the cost. Russian and Chinese outlets seized the moment, calling it proof that Western democracy in Africa was a failed experiment, a hollow promise dressed in the language of freedom, but enforced through the same colonial logic of control. Yet amid the geopolitical noise, something human remained. In Atlanta, in London, in Toronto, Tanzanian students marched with placards reading "Justice for Lissu" and "Truth Beyond Borders." They chanted in English, in Swahili, and in silence. Because sometimes silence itself is the message. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of mourning. The silence that says, "We see you, we remember you, we will not let your names be erased." Back in Tanzania, the government doubled down. Curfews extended into weeks. Internet remained throttled. Tourism dropped after images of tear gas and gunfire flooded international news. The Tanzanian shilling weakened. Foreign investors quietly pulled out. The government blamed foreign interference, but markets, like people, rarely believe excuses. And yet, even in that suffocating grip, solidarity flickered. Generation Uwazi grew stronger. Their slogan, "We don't need revenge, we need justice," spread across East Africa, appearing on bracelets, t-shirts, graffiti, and hashtags. The government blocked their website, but the phrase lived on every tongue. One evening, as the sun bled into the Indian Ocean, a single candle burned before the gates of the University of Dar es Salaam. No one knew who placed it there. Students walked past. Some bowed their heads. Others paused to watch. Wind threatened to snuff it out, but the flame held steady. That night, a photo of the candle spread across the internet with a single caption, "Still burning." And for the first time in months, Tanzanians felt something stronger than fear. The quiet certainty that even in darkness, light remembers where to hide. From Dar es Salaam to Ouagadougou, from the Indian Ocean to Burkina Faso's red earth, a generation was finding its voice. Their message was simple, ancient, unstoppable. Dignity is the seed of freedom. It can be buried, but it will grow again when watered by courage.
And on a quiet evening in Dar es Salaam, one candle proved that even in darkness, light remembers where to hide. As we prepare to end, remember, this is not the end of the road, but a seed planted in the soil of your heart. Every story of dignity, every voice of sovereignty is part of a harvest that lies ahead. If you want to see that harvest grow, subscribe. Let this channel, Rise of Africa, be the road we walk together, the light we carry forward. Your subscription is not for us alone. It is for the promise of what is still to come. Join us and be ready for the next chapter that is already waiting to be written. Dawn returns to Dar es Salaam. The streets glisten with the soft reflection of last night's rain. Vendors sweep away ash and broken glass. Somewhere, a radio hums an old gospel tune, the kind sung during struggle, the kind that hides sorrow inside hope. The government calls it peace restored. The people call it the quiet before truth speaks again. Across the country, life resumes its fragile rhythm. Children walk to school, passing murals that have been painted over.
Newspapers publish stories about economic recovery and national unity, but every headline feels like a whisper avoiding the word everyone knows, fear. And yet, fear cannot erase memory. In living rooms and cafes, people replay the footage, the chants, the tear gas, the boy with a torn flag standing before a police truck, his face bruised but unbroken. He has become a symbol larger than any speech, larger than any decree. His image circulates still, saved on hidden hard drives, shared through encrypted networks, proof that courage, once witnessed, cannot be unwitnessed. The world's attention has already moved on to new crises, new headlines. But Tanzania's silence remains an unfinished sentence. Because what happened here is not just a local tragedy. It is a mirror for every nation that mistakes control for strength and silence for stability. In the United States, those old enough to remember the civil rights marches watch the images from East Africa with a shiver of recognition. The raised fists, the police lines, the courage of the unarmed. History does not repeat, but it rhymes. And perhaps that rhythm, now heard in Swahili, is what democracy needs to remember its heartbeat. From Dar es Salaam to Ouagadougou, from the shores of the Indian Ocean to the red earth of Burkina Faso, a generation is finding its voice. When Ibrahim Traore spoke of dignity as the seed of freedom, he spoke for every young African who refuses to be silenced. When Tanzania's youth stood in the streets with nothing but signs and songs, they stood not just for their own nation, but for every nation where power has forgotten that it exists to serve, not to silence. Their message is simple, ancient, unstoppable. Freedom does not belong to power. It belongs to the people. So when a nation begins to silence its youth, it does not only lose dissent, it loses direction. And when its people dare to speak again, it rediscovers its soul. The official narrative says the crisis is over, but truth knows better. In the encrypted networks where Generation Uwazi continues to document, to witness, to remember, the work goes on. In the law offices where young attorneys draft petitions knowing the cost, courage persists. In the churches and mosques where prayers are whispered for the voiceless, faith endures. And somewhere in Dar es Salaam, in a darkened room, Aisha sits by candlelight and writes another message. She does not know if anyone will see it. She does not know if it will matter. But she writes anyway, because silence has taught her its opposite. That even the smallest voice, when spoken with courage, can crack the foundation of fear. She writes, "The candle still burns, not in defiance, but in patience, waiting for the wind to carry its light further. By morning, the note is gone, but by evening, it is everywhere." Because freedom, once remembered, never truly dies.
It only waits for the next voice brave enough to say its name. If you believe the truth must outlive fear, share this story. If you believe that freedom must belong to those who fight for it, stay with Rise of Africa. Because as long as voices rise, even in whispers, even in exile, democracy still breathes. Justice, freedom, uwazi.